Hi, this is Nikki Woods, and as a part of my Wanna Be an Author series, I am pleased to talk to this next guest. Now, all through 2015, my plan is to give you information, tools, resources, and introduce you to people that are going to, help make this journey a little bit easier for you as you journey to become an author. So, my guest, Mikki Dawson, she was raised in Louisiana. She's an author and an award-winning filmmaker who attributes her new career life to her faith in God. She's always had a passion for writing and film, and then in 2011, she left a 13-year career as a corporate recruiting manager at a Fortune 500 company to follow her lifelong dream. Now, by 2012, Mikki had produced the award-winning documentary film Black and Right. Black and Right. The film boasts an impressive roster, including Zane, you know her, Antoine Fisher from the Antoine Fisher Story, Eric LaSalle from Coming to America and ER, who is an author himself now, Rashonda Tate Billingsley, and Bentley Kyle Evans, who is a television executive producer. He worked on, I believe, Martin is one of his shows that he worked on, and he is currently doing some work in TV right now as well. So Mikki now manages social media campaigns, she produces book trailers, short films, and she also provides coaching to up-and-coming self-published authors. She resides in Austin with her husband and her two boys. So how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh no, I am thrilled. I watched the documentary and I was just fascinated. I think that obviously everybody's journey to becoming an author is a little bit different. But just having this discussion about how to do it and why it can be so different for people is important. So what really prompted you to produce this documentary?
Well, film was my passion. Even though I started as an author, I couldn't really figure out how to get in film. I don't want to be an actress. I just want to be a writer. But, I wanted to write films, but I was like, how do I do that? And I started thinking about what are some of the mediums that I enjoyed in the documentary, just medium. I just enjoy that. I love that raw story of real people and, people telling what's true to their experience. And so, I was attending a conference and I found out that conference was going to be going away. And I kind of I felt like, how they say when, a person dies, it's like an entire library of things goes away. And so I felt like, wow, this conference is going to go away. And I had met so many amazing authors who were like me and, just trying to kind of find their way and get that first book out or, they got the first book out and now they're trying to get to the second one. And so, I just sort of started really there that, this conference is going away. People are going to miss that. They're going to miss that connection they have. But then outside of the conference, it sort of started to spiral on its own. Like people really had a lot of thoughts around how they felt about it. And so then sort of, the plan really wasn't to have, Bentley Evans or Antoine. Those just sort of fell into place. And I think it's because really and truly people are so passionate about our literature and our culture, but nobody's really talking about the things that they don't like about it. So it just sort of all fell together.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think that it's such and I didn't realize it until, because I've always been a writer like you, I've just always written, but it wasn't, 10 years ago I decided, okay, let me do a book. I'm going to write a book and I'm going to publish a book. And I thought that was it. You just decided you were going to write a book and then you decided you were going to publish it. But it really is a whole subcultural, thing. It's a community and you really have to kind of work your way in to that community. And I didn't realize, that was kind of expected of you. And if you weren't in that circle, so to speak, that it was harder to make entryway. That was my experience. Like I said, that was 10 years ago, and a lot has changed since then, especially when it comes to self-publishing. What did you find about the whole thought about self-publishing and how it's changed in recent years?
Well, I also had kind of that same experience. I sort of thought, I'm going to write my book and it's going to be great and it's just going to sort of take off on its own. And then that doesn't happen and you're sort of like, wow, what all did I not do or whatever. But I think when I originally looked at self-publishing, it seemed like that's the best route to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I still feel like that may be the right choice for some people. But for some people, going that traditional publishing route may be a better way. And so I think one of the key things for me was to give people kind of that there's two sides to it, no matter how you look at it. If you self-publish, there's going to be some challenges that you may not be ready for. And I think it's gotten harder over, like you said, in the last 10 years, once, electronic readers came out and more people could write books, it's gotten harder for people to self-publish.
Now, why do you say that it's harder? Why do you think it's harder?
I think because the market is so saturated.
Okay.
And there's so many people who are writing books. And, some of the authors talk about this in the film. Anybody can write a book. Anybody.
And anybody can publish it. And I was amazed when I was starting to research like Amazon, CreateSpace, and some of those things, how they have an option for you just to do everything on your own. I mean, you can literally just upload a Word document and push publish, and you're a published author.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the problem with that is because, we're a very community type of people. So if I say to you, hey, this is a good book, I'm going to give it to you, as opposed to say, hey, go out and buy this book. So because we have that kind of passing between us,
mm-hmm.
As people, I think what ends up happening is people have been passed a lot of things and they're like, well, this isn't good or that isn't good. Like we all know that, people like Elin Harris started by selling his books at hair salons.
Right.
Well, those women sat in those hair salons and passed it to the next person who said, I have to go buy that. Well, now you have, people uploading that Word document who have not gone through editing because they don't want to pay for it, or they haven't had a typesetter, so it looks like a Word document.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of stuff, it really becomes, it taints the business. It taints the integrity that authors who are self-publishing and they go through all of those steps, it makes it
mm-hmm.
that much harder for them. So that's why I said I think it's harder now
mm-hmm.
because you have that oversaturation of people who can just say, okay, I wrote the 79,000 words, the end, send.
No, I totally agree, and I get that. But I was having this discussion actually with, I think, Victoria Christopher Murray, who is, partners with Rashonda Tate Billingsley and their publishing company. And I was having this discussion because I do think that overall, the thought of self-publishing has gotten better. Meaning, like 10 years ago when I thought about publishing and I was looking at the two different routes, self-publishing seemed to be more of an option for people who couldn't get a traditional publishing deal. So there was a different way of viewing self-published authors, that they weren't good enough in some regards, so they had to do it on their own. And I think that's shifted over the last 10 years. I think now self-publishing, people don't even really kind of look at it anymore. I mean, they don't look at the publisher anymore to see, they look, like you said, at the quality of the book, but I don't think that they, that stigma, for lack of a better word, is there anymore.
Right, I would agree. I think because now you also... self-publishing opened the doors for that guy down the street who's a graphic artist, and now he's designed your book cover, right? Mm-hmm. It's opened the door for those kind of people who, wanted to learn how it is to typeset a book. You open the door for all of them, so I think they sort of add to it, mm-hmm. Or the English teacher who wants to make a little bit more, so she edits a book, which isn't always a great idea.
I was going to say now.
Not a great idea.
Yeah.
But, I hear so much of that, because I hear from people say, oh, well, my best friend is an English teacher for 3rd grade and she's going to edit my book. Bad idea. But if it works for you. So I think over time, it has gotten so saturated. Mm-hmm. It's hard for even the self-published author who's taken the time to go through the countless steps and has done their research. It's harder for them to get their material out because the consumer, and that being, add social media to that, the consumer takes away, okay, I saw the book cover, I'm not so interested in the title, you're forcing it on me, you're telling me I should read it. Sometimes people have bad covers and great books. Sometimes people have great covers and not so great books. So you have to decipher all of the images and all of the mm-hmm. postings and all of the things for yourself, and sort of how do you figure out who's great and who's okay And who is the best kept secret? It's just really hard to do that.
Yeah, and I agree. I was, I published 10 years ago, and then when Rashonda and Victoria started their publishing company, they came back to me and they were like, "Do you want to re-edit and republish this book and put out a new edition?" And when I first published it, I was really set on how I wanted things to go, even though I was still through a small publishing company. I really wanted things the way I wanted things. And the biggest lesson I learned, because Victoria, I had given my book to Victoria 10 years ago at a book conference, and I think it was the Indiana Book Expo or something, but I had given her the book, but the cover did not speak at all to what was in the book. And it was very and I wanted it to be very general. I didn't want it to be, African American. I wanted it to be general. And it didn't do anything. And that's because people really do look at the cover and decide whether or not they want to learn more about this book, whether we like it or not. They look at the cover and they decide if that's something they want to pick up and learn. And so Victoria was like, "Well, we just can't do this cover. I'm going to just tell you now, we can't do it." And I had learned that there are professionals, and you really have to figure out who is a professional and who knows what they're talking about, as opposed to, like you said, your third grade teacher just deciding they want to edit your book. It's not, maybe they can, but it's not always a great idea. So what did you learn through your publishing experience about, finding the experts and going to the people that have the knowledge?
Well, I think the biggest thing I actually learned was how important editing was. I was just visiting a friend not long ago, and I saw my first draft, which I'm sure it's tucked away somewhere, but I had my first draft that was bound up from Kinko's, the 8x10, and I started to read it, and I was mortified. I was like, "Oh my God, I wrote that?" compared to where the book landed. Mm-hmm. I knew that there were certain steps that were really important. I knew that part, and I wasn't going to skip on those pieces. And that's why every author's experience is very different. For me, it was the after the book is published piece. So now I have to market the book, and I have to go and I have to get people to do it. I think that piece is very underrated, and it's not really something that I cover in the film, but for me, it just was a little overwhelming once the whole picture came together. Because by the time you finish writing a book, and if you do take all the steps and go through editing and go through the typesetting and go through the cover design, and you've got to upload it and the Amazon versus Smashwords and Lightning Source, by the time you do all of that, you're exhausted. You are completely exhausted. And so if you don't have a team around you, yes, your friends and family are going to buy your book, and don't be surprised even if some of them don't. Right. And I think a lot of people miss that thought also. You've got to market the book. You have to sell it. You have to either sell yourself or you have to sell the book. You have to sell a combination of both. People have to like you. You know, I've had people talk to me and they'll say, "Oh, I don't really want to go to book events, and I don't want to do, I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do that." And I'll just tell them, you're not going to sell books that way. You have to get out there. You have to start competing, and you have to realize that, there's going to be the, Rashondas and Victorias that are going to be in the same space that you're going to be in. So how is your product going to stand out? Don't put your boyfriend on the cover. Probably not a good idea, So take the time to go through thinking out the steps, but the marketing, it's just as important.
Yeah, I'm writing an ebook about how to develop your author platform, and I saw a quote from, and I can't remember who it's from, but it said that, marketers don't have to be great writers, but writers have to be great marketers. And my message, to any of my clients is that you have to start even before the book is done. You have to start developing that platform. And like you said, get people to invest in you. Because once they like you and once they want to be a part of whatever you're doing, they'll buy the book. But you have to start and you have to do it. And even when you're with a Random House or a Simon & Schuster, they still expect you to market the book. I think one way, especially for a lot of the African American writers that I know, that at one point, were really, really rolling like the Bernice McFadden's and some of those. I mean, they just want to write. They don't want to market. They just want to write. And when you tell them, okay, you got to get out there on the social media, you got to do this, it's a whole different mindset to switch into. So I think that's been to the detriment of a lot of African American writers especially.
Well, and if you think about it, like most times writers are very introverted people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really the type of lifestyle that, somebody is, super extroverted and they can go and talk and have a speech and, but nowadays you almost have to do that. You have to find that extrovert button so you can go and be able to talk to people. But I see it all the time when I go to book fairs, they just sort of sit there because it's intimidating to be in that room and, all these authors are around and there's always the keynote author who walks through and has the trail of people and, but they work to get that. And because we are such a, society driven, we're very social in how we interact with each other, you can't hide behind, your need to go inward. You do that whenever you're writing. And that's, like I had rules when I was writing.
Oh, wow. What were your rules?
My rules were past 8 o'clock, I would turn my phone off and I would put it in another room. And nobody could bother me unless the house was on fire or somebody died. And that was the rule. So that I could really go into the place that I needed to go into to write and hear the characters and feel them and touch them and see them and all of the things that work for me. And that's what really helped me kind of, nurture the introvert in me that wants to write and go into this little world of mine. But I'm lucky that I'm balanced and I am an extrovert. So it's easy for me to go do that. But for a lot of people, it's not, and they can't do that. And I think that's sad because I think it makes people miss some other steps because marketing is important. And someone said to me, you should start marketing 6 months before your book is going to be ready. Well, 6 months before the book was ready, especially on the first, on your first product, I was like, I can't even think about marketing. I'm just trying to get through this, So I think that's a difficult place for an author to be. And I think the more that we talk about it and the more that we share with people and teach them, then maybe it'll kind of get through and maybe, people will listen. And I think people have to start, really investing in themselves. It's an investment to write a book. You can't it's not free. You're going to have to pay something. You have to set some kind of budget because, if you get everything free, you may not end up with the best product.
Best product,
and,
yeah.
When it doesn't sell or, and then there's also that layer of people who are going to be reading it going, this is terrible, but they don't want to hurt your feelings and they don't want to tell you because they know how hard you've worked. And so it's all these dynamics. So it behooves any author to make sure that they do everything that they can to start marketing and start to get comfortable with different people. You need a broad group of people.
You do. You really do.
At your material. Yeah.
I was telling, even when my first book, when the first edition came out, it went through probably 4 different edits. My mother even took the book when she went to Jamaica. My mother's Jamaican, and so my parents spend 6 months of the year there now. And she took the book and she read it from the last page backwards. She read it backwards because she had read it, so many times that she, when you read your own stuff, you start to put stuff in there that you're not there. So she did that. And even when I republished the book and went through 2 more edits, there were still things that were caught in those edits. And that's what I don't think people get. I mean, you can't just read it once. And like you said, you can't have, your best friend read it or your English teacher necessarily read it. And it be, you have to go through a couple edits.
Right.
In order and edit for different things, edit for, the grammar and all of that. But you also have to edit for continuity and content and that sort of thing. And I still don't think people get that.
It's funny you say that because when I first started, I wasn't sure I wanted to write a book. So what I did is I took the first 10 or 15 people that I knew, but I didn't know well. I hadn't known them for a long time. Some of them I had just met within a few months at a conference. And I said to those people, I think I want to write a book. And so what I'd like to do is, before I just take off and go do it, I'm going to write 1 chapter. And as long as you guys keep reading, as long as you keep saying you want more, I'll write more. And I sort of did it that way because I didn't want to write the whole thing and people say, oh yeah, that was great. I hated our book,
Right.
So I took their comments from that. I took their passion from that. And I said to them, you can share it if you want to. And they started to share it, and it just sort of started to spiral on its own. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm onto something. But still not understanding, like, all of the things that it would take. It took almost 2 years for me to write my first book. And looking at it now, I'm like, geez, I just should have wrote it and then threw it into editing and let it sit there for the longest time, because that is such a crucial piece.
It is.
Your first draft to your final draft is so important, because you grow as a writer, because you become more challenged with, like you said, that continuity of the story, making sure that people don't get bored. If you get bored, they're going to close the book up. They're going to put it on their nightstand. They're going to tell you that they finished it. And then they won't give you a review. And guess what? They're not going to tell their friends to buy it. They may even tell their friends, it's not that great.
Yeah.
So you have to, yeah.
And it's funny, you talk about the growth of a writer. Having republished my book, I was amazed at some of the things that I said. I was amazed that my mother didn't say, why are you, it was just, you just grow, and, I had become a mother, and it just, things change. And so it was just interesting to see how, much I had grown. And just like you said, I mean, think about the continuity, you think about the depth of the characters, and you think about how you keep that reader engaged. I mean, it's a process. You don't just sit down and write. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. I want to talk a little bit about how you let your book go, because I think that's a big challenge that people have. And then I want to talk about the documentary, Black and White, more specifically. But a lot of times people, it's like, I got to tweak this and I got to tweak that. How were you able just to let your book go and say, okay, it's time. I need to put it out there?
Well, now I will say some of this has to do with my personal personality. Mm-hmm. I don't have attachment issues. Like, I can easily let things go.
Okay. Okay.
But I'll tell you when I really knew that I needed to put the book down. I was going through, and I was like, oh, I should say this. And then I would put that in there, and then about 3 sentences down, there was exactly what I thought I should have put in. And I was like, okay. And I had that happen to me about 3 times. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm done. And I started to feel over it. I was just over the whole process. And so I don't have attachment issues. So for some people, I understand that attachment issue, though. I don't want to make it sound like, I just sort of, let it fly into the wind. Because my book was actually the very first thing that I let people read. I've been writing since I was in the 7th grade. But I had never let people read anything. I had already been, holding on to it. And my excuse was, oh, well, I've got this new job, or, oh, I need to finish college, or, oh, now I'm getting married, or, oh, I'm moving. I had like 1,000 reasons why I never finished it. And then I'd go to another story. Oh, well, I didn't finish that story. I'm going to finish this story. And then I just sort of like sat down and I said, okay, you know what? Like, you're one thing at a time here. So get the book done, put it out, move on to the next thing. Like I think life changes you in that aspect. I think you just sort of start to reshift your focus and say, okay, I want to feel that sense of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to feel that. I wanted to hold it in my hands, and I wanted to just thumb through and say, every word of that book I put on a piece of paper. Yeah. So I had no problems letting it go.
Yeah, I think I'm probably more like you. I mean, when I was done, I was just done. I was like, and I think I realized just from being in journalism how important the editing process is for any writer. And so I think I was ready just to be like, okay, because I really think you can write a good book, and if you have a really good editor, they can make it a great book. And so I was ready to get it in the editing process more so than for me to keep tweaking it. I was ready for somebody else to say, okay, this needs to be developed. You don't need this in the book, that sort of thing. So I was just ready to I'm always ready to finish my part and get it to the next step. So.
Yeah, but one thing that is important that I will say, that when I started in editing, it is very hard for authors, especially new authors going through the process. Oh, yeah. I think it's so hard for them when they get that first round of edits back, especially if you have an editor that cares about your content, cares about you, cares about your success. It's so hard to get those first couple of rounds back, because you've already done the blood, sweat, and tears, or so you think, to get to putting it to the editor in the first place. And now the editor has come back to tell you, well, pretty much everything that you said, we're going to shift around. We're going to.
It's like somebody telling you your baby isn't cute. I mean, it's so hard.
On the baby, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You've gone through 9 months of labor.
Oh, yeah.
You had a sick pregnancy where you were throwing up every day. You know what I mean? It's that. And then the baby comes out, and you're like, I got a baby. And somebody says, not only is your baby not cute, your baby has warts. Your baby is going to be like half bald.
Yeah.
Your baby is missing 3 fingers. I mean, it's like, what?
Yeah.
Because when you look at your baby, you're like, it's perfect, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of those things that, people feel that because they feel it so deeply. They're like, but I wrote this, or they'll ask for a critique on it. Sometimes people will ask, and I don't critique books, so please don't send me books. But because I don't want to say to people, well, I think you need to do this, and you need to go back to this step. Because a lot of times people just come and the product is finished. Like I remember somebody came to me once and said, they brought me a flyer and said, hey, what do you think of my new book cover? Like, I really want you to be honest, and I really want your feedback. And I said, well, have you printed this already on the book? And she was like, yeah, I love it. And in my head, I was like, well, if she loves it, then guess what?
I love it too, right? I love it too.
Because I can't tell her at that point, you've already printed it. You've already sent out for your 1,000 books to come to you. You've paid for that. So I can't tell you, maybe you shouldn't do that with this cover. Maybe you should do something different. Or do you see kind of how this looks a little bit, Like I have a friend who has a book cover. It's a great book. But I told her, I said, does your character have a black eye in the story? And she was like, no. Why do you say that? And I was like, look, it looks a little dark under the eye right there. Like she'd never seen that. And she got it fixed. And she was like, so glad you said that. Like I didn't see that. I didn't think about that.
And that's important because I've had the same situation happen where people have come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, people are blasting my book on Amazon because of all the grammatical errors and this, and they're telling people not to buy the book and they'll never read anything from me again. Should I fix it? Yeah. And then you should send a free copy to everybody who blasted you on Amazon and let them know thank you for helping me, because that, it's a big deal. And I think that's the reason why, like you, I stress that whole editing process. And maybe that's why I love it so much, because I know what's going to happen on the other side.
I don't love it.
Yeah.
I won't tell you that. I don't love it. It was I don't want to sugarcoat things for people. It was a miserable process.
And it is a difficult process because, like I said, it's like them coming back and telling you you're not as great. That book that you think is so great is not as great as you thought. So I'm not saying, and you're right, and I don't want to, it's not, but I think because I've developed such a good relationship with my editor, like I use the same editor. I mean, I don't pick different editors, and I think that's an important step too, to find somebody that you really trust and that has the best interest at heart for your book and for you as an author. And I think that makes it a little bit easier because, like I said, once I know it's done and we've gone through this process, it's going to be a better book and it's going to be a better product. But you're right. It's a difficult process. It is a difficult process. So tell me, when you decided that you were going to do the documentary Black and White, and you said it kind of, came together, how did you kind of decide who was going to be in it and what you wanted to speak to? How did you start putting that piece of it together?
Well, so the beginning part, I was at the Black Writers Reunion and Conference, and it was their last conference because, again, it sort of really started from this conference going away and, sort of like, what do these people do now who came here every year and took all this information and got these friendships? So what do they do now? So it really started with them. And that roster included Dr. Venice Berry and Rashonda Tate Billingsley, although I didn't get to interview Rashonda at the conference that I ended up having to go to her house. But it really started off because they were all self-published. And it really was going to be a story of sort of the unknown people, or people whose stories that I knew had 1 or 2 or 3 books, but not a lot. it sort of started that way. And then by a random trip that I was taking for something completely different, I ended up meeting the mentee to Eric LaSalle and found out that he had written a book. And I was like, fascinating, because I thought that I assumed, I didn't even think, I just assumed that he was with a publisher. And I thought, well, I certainly want to get his perspective. And so I ended up interviewing him. And then it just sort of spiraled from there. One person really led to another person, kind of thing. Like, I didn't seek out Bentley Kyle Evans. He was another person that I was actually at the Hollywood Black Film Festival.
Right.
And I just sort of ran into him, and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm a filmmaker." And he said, "Well, what film have you made?" And I said, "Well, I'm making a documentary right now on Black writers." And he said, "Well, how come you're not talking to me?" I said, "Because you didn't give me your number to call you." You know, so it just sort of spiraled from there. And the next day I was interviewing him. You know, I sent information about the film and sort of some of the people who were in it, and then got in touch with Zane, and she agreed. I didn't plan for Omar Tyree to be in it. When I finished interviewing Zane, she said, "Hey, Omar's in town. You should interview him." So he sort of came over. So I really feel like, you know, I started the concept of the film, and I started with the basis of it, but it snowballed and rolled it to itself. That film really made itself. And that's kind of when you know you're on the right track and you're doing the right thing, is when all of a sudden the effort just becomes you showing up to wherever that's going to be, because everything else is just sort of falling in place, and then sort of things sort of fall into your lap that you don't expect, you know. But I didn't, you know, and a lot of people ask me, well, how come this person wasn't in it? Or how come this person wasn't in it? Or how come I wasn't approached? And it just was sort of like, you know, even I think that the number of authors in it now, even in the way that it is now, I think is too many, you know. I think, I'm like, God, people are overwhelmed, which is why I keep reminding people that this is their name and this is their name, because there's so many. And that wasn't originally, you know, the plan. But when, you know, and this is more where my faith comes in, I feel like when God opened the doors that he opened for me and allowed everyone to be so open and so honest and so, you know, so truthful about why they became an author, or what disparities that they saw in the Black community, or what they saw in Black literature, it just felt like, I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So while I did pieces of it, I can only attribute a lot of it to, you know, my faith in God and knowing that this was my path and what I was supposed to do.
Absolutely. So what were some of the top takeaways from the documentary for you? What were some of the key points?
Well, and I think because, you know, my goal ultimately is to be a screenwriter and director. I think for me it was really that Hollywood piece. I had all of my ahas at that moment. Interviewing Antoine Fisher and just understanding really how his story came to be, because he actually wrote his screenplay first. He didn't write the book Finding Fish first. And, you know, he was sort of trying to shop the screenplay, but he had to then backpedal around, go write the book. The book became its success. And then when it was time for them, and they said, you know, we want to turn this into a screenplay, he was like, done.
Done.
I was already there, you know? So I think it was that understanding the layer of how to get in. I think finding out about different resources, like, you know, Bentley talks about some of the conferences that are held. And I don't think that we seek that information out enough, or we don't know where to find it, or we don't share it. I'm not sure what that answer is. But, you know, he talked about NATPE, which is NATPE. It's a conference where people come internationally, buyers, distributors for everything, you know, and he was saying how you should just take your book and your product and go there. If you want to make your book into a movie, it's not going, so, you know, there's going to be what I call kind of the one layer that's going to, you know, land it in the right hands, and the right person's going to love it, and boom, presto. But that's so rare, and I think people have to stop feeling like, well, I'm that rare too. Well, we all are different in every single way. But your path, everybody's path is also different. So your path may be that you would do better to go to a conference and meet, you know, a distributor, right? You never know what some, demographically, what I think culturally we miss in the African American community, especially here in America, is that internationally, they're very interested in how we live and how we think and what we talk about. And I mean, let's look at how hip hop has, infused itself into everything. Books can do the same thing, but I think as authors, we don't spend enough time sort of researching different avenues. We all want to, if I could, people think if I could just give my book to Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey can't sit down and read your book, honey. I'm sorry to tell you. You know why? Because within an hour, 12 people are going to ask him a book.
And you know what? And I think the other point, I was talking to an actress yesterday, and she does very well. I mean, you may not know who she is, but she makes a really solid living, being an actress. And I think that piece of it is missing in a lot of the entertainment fields. That you don't have to have a name that everybody knows to be doing well as an author. Right. And so I think that piece of it too. I mean, we all are about our craft, and we all want that #1 New York Times bestseller book, and we all want our books to be optioned as a movie. But like you said, that doesn't happen necessarily for everybody. And I've met people.
It's not a bad position to be in if you're number 200.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Sort of like that. That's where people have to sort of think about. I heard someone say not too long ago, Gina Prince Bythewood, she was quoting somebody else, but I can't remember who she got from. Chase the art. Don't chase the glory.
Yeah.
Don't chase, necessarily, I have to be a New York Times bestseller. Because there are lots of great authors. There are lots of we're seeing it now with the Oscars. There's lots of great films that just because it doesn't get what you perceive is, saying that I am the best. If that happens, I think people should look at it, think of it as a bonus prize. It's like a cherry on top of a cake.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you bake a cake and the layer is good and the frosting is great and you've decorated it and it's beautiful and when people eat it, they love it, then that's what you want more than anything. Because there's plenty of things that, go way high and you're like, wasn't that great? So, there's going to be people who don't like there are people right now who don't like Selma. It's like, it's a great film.
Yeah.
People that don't like, there were people who didn't like Django. Me personally, I loved it, So it's not necessarily having that need to say, I think it's not having that need to have something validate you and validate whether you're a great writer. You're going to know you're a great writer by the audience that reads it and says to you by your review, by the reviews, or by talking to you and say, hey, that really changed me,
Right.
And for me, like even with my book, when people, there were people who hated it, right, and I expected that, and I was okay with that, and then there were people who were like, this changed my life, this changed how I see myself. Or people who said there was this part and I cried and I wanted to tell you how, and I was like, you cried at that part? I didn't think it was that deep, but okay. So.
Right.
But those little things, they stick with me. Like, I'll never forget those people. And to me, that's my New York Times moment. That was my, it's the same thing with Black and White. It's not all over the place, right? But it's these kind of conversations. It's people who, write to me on Facebook and say, man, what I'm thinking about this whole thing a little differently now. So for me, I'm chasing the art. I'm chasing learning my art and being better. I'm not chasing the glory because no matter how good something may be and no matter how widespread it may be, we all can see that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get that gratification. So you have to have that within yourself. And for me, that comes from my centering and my life with God and my spiritual walk of knowing this is a gift that you gave me. So I thank you for that gift. So that's kind of how I, really look at it. And I try to tell people to, change your mindset about how you see success. You have to change that. Because if you're looking for, that golden button, let's think about the authors who, Lord of the Rings was the best book in 1912.
Yeah.
A top book in like 1912 or something, right? Authors who don't ever see
Their success. Yeah, their yeah. That's a good point.
The girl with the girl with the dragon tattoo, the author of that book, was poor his entire life. Now his grandkids are reaping it royally.
Yeah.
Because now the book is, it's number one, this and that, and he never saw any of that. So, right, chasing that art and chasing, to be the best, so that when you're gone, because you have to think about that, when I leave this earth, my book will still be here. And in 100 years, somebody may pick it up and say, this Pulitzer Prize material here is the best thing ever, right? And my great-grandkids are going to be like, thanks a lot, great-grandma.
Right. And and I think that's really important too. I think that, but I also, in the same vein, I think in this new age, I think it's important to equip ourselves with the tools like the marketing piece of it and other, outlets so that we can do what we love and still sustain ourselves financially. So I think that's important too. I think that you can, like I said, you can make a solid living being a writer without all of this extra stuff going on. But one thing also that you said that I want to talk about before I let you go is finding that audience and writing to them. I think that too many of us, we write and then we see, some reviews that says, oh, she should change this and she should do this differently. And if she had done this, I would have liked the book. And we write based on that instead of writing based on what people really love and trying to nurture that audience instead of trying to gain everybody.
Well, so I think one of the biggest things about even the film is that I'm sort of, that was another kind of purpose and reason. Mm-hmm. If you go to the bookshelf and you go to the African American section, you don't see a very diverse. You don't see enough diversity in the content, mm-hmm. and you sort of see the same thing over and over and over. It's just packaged differently, and I think we have to step away from that. Like, I'm wondering, where is the next Alice Walker? Where is the next James Baldwin? Are there no James Baldwin writers out here? Or I'm looking at authors like Eric LaSalle, who is, written a thriller. I don't even read thrillers. It's not my genre. I don't particularly enjoy it because I don't like scary things. I don't watch scary movies.
Well, then Eric's was really scary. I was like, I couldn't read that book at night.
Well, I couldn't read it at night, but I also couldn't stop reading.
Yeah, no, it was, and I tell people that though too. If you can write a good book, I don't care what genre it's in. If it's a really well written, thoughtful, book, I can read it. I don't care if I like the genre or not, and that really speaks to the quality of Eric's writing. It's just a good book.
Right, it's a great book because it scares you.
Yeah,
but you still want to know what's going to happen.
Right,
and so I really want to just see more diversity for us overall. A lot of times people get hung up on the bookstore placement issue. I'm not so hung up on that. I think it's, I think in some ways it's good, in some ways it's bad. I'm not so hung up on, whether other authors are getting, these big advances and we don't, yes, you read those stories and you're like, what? That doesn't seem fair, but, but I also think that if we don't start to change what we're writing, then the publishers really are only going to, those who are getting published, they're only going to pick up certain things. And, they're going to always jump on the next it thing. Mm-hmm. So what I feel like I'm waiting for is that great, fantastic, novel that's just a good family story, like A Color Purple or something. I'm waiting for that to happen and for the publishers to pick it up and then say, this is all we want from African American authors. This is all we want. All we want are, good quality stories. We don't want a whole lot of this anymore. We don't want any more Ratchet. We have enough Ratchet. There's a place for Ratchet, and we all get our laughs from it. I do too. But it has to be a balance.
And
And the balance
I
is
agree,
so
but I
skewed.
was even told, and it's so frustrating because I was told when I was looking at getting my second book that I'm too literary. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And they're like, people don't want literary. They want ratchet. They want mindless entertainment where you don't really. And so it's a struggle, I think, for some writers because they want to be published and they want to be accepted and they want people to buy their books. And so they change how they write and they try to give people, like when Zane, got all this success writing, I call her nasty books, writing, semi-erotica. I always tell Zane, does it have to be nasty on the first page? Can we work up to the nasty? But when she got all that success, then people wanted to write books just like Zane. So then we had that whole rash of erotica, I guess, for lack of a better word, for African Americans. It spoke
And
to
now we
African
have a
Americans.
rash of ratchet.
Yeah,
So
and so it's
that,
frustrating.
it is frustrating.
Because you are who you are as a writer. I tell people you can't really. I mean, I guess good writers can write anything the way people ask them to write. But if you really want to write from your soul, you have to write the way that you write, and you write who you are.
And I think that's the key. You said something very key. You have to write from your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I think a writer can write anything. Would I write a thriller? Probably not, because it's not my genre. But when I read it, do I enjoy it? Yes. Would it be a challenge for me to write something like that? Absolutely. But I think I would want to challenge myself maybe in a different way. Even when I look back at, selecting my book, and because I have other books that I would write, I'm probably not going to make them books. But when I thought about all the different ideas, like which one do I want to write, I maybe would have chosen something different.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have, because that book has done some great things for me, and I needed that book to be exactly what it was, and I needed it to come out when it did. But I would also like to do something else so that people know that I'm a broad writer. I'm not just in the generalized circle.
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't want authors to do is to just make that assumption, well, this is what's on the shelf, so let me forget the sci-fi that I have in my head story that I want to write. No, write your sci-fi story, because it shows the broadness and the diverse, group of people that we are, because our experiences are so different,
Mm-hmm.
That person who enjoys talking to their grandmother and hears that story and says, man, I want to tell my grandmother's story, life story, then tell that story. And then that way the publishers can say, well, we only need to buy really one or two ratchet. There's going to be some of that. But they also like to read, this part over here or that part over there. And the lines are getting a little bit blurry, even with, and some of the authors talk about this in the film. Dr. Berry said, there's books like The Preacher's My Baby's Daddy. Well, that's because, you're trying to kind of touch on that Christian side, the religious side of people that, that's something very close, to us in our spirituality, our faith. That's something that's very close, but you want to marry that with a little bit of ratchetness, so that, well, if that works, then that's great. Make that work for you. But don't make someone else's formula your formula. Find your own formula. Because when you find your own voice and it was the same thing with me. I had to find my own voice, and where I found my voice was in film. But when I really thought about my life and I thought back over it, that's where my heart and my voice had always been.
Mm-hmm.
But I chose to go the book route because I needed to write, I needed to get something out, I needed to do it for that moment. But the genre that I wrote in, I wouldn't continue in that genre because I don't write at the level that Zane writes in that genre. She's great at that, It's kind of like when, you were a little kid and your mom said, you're great at this, honey. You're really great at that. You're not so great at that.
Right.
But that's okay. Everybody can be great at everything. So if writing street lit isn't really if you didn't grow up and you don't understand street lit, don't write it. Don't write it just because you think I came up with a hot title. Partner with somebody, give them, help them maybe with their book or something. I don't know. There's different ways to do it, but I think it has to stop. I think people have to stop sort of feeling like they have to get on a bandwagon, because then that changes the dynamics. What are we passing down to our children? Mm-hmm. What books are, present day. Can you right now go in a bookstore and say, in the Black community, I'm going to give this to my daughter. This is something I want her to read. This is something that she has to read, right? We have to start thinking about that. And if you go to Walmart today, you probably won't find a book that you're going to read and say, I want to give this to my child. And that's a difference of how our generation was. Our parents told us about these authors. You need to read James Baldwin. You need to read Richard Wright. We're not having those conversations because you can't pass down Ratchet. You could, but it's probably not a good idea.
It's so funny. My 13-year-old is reading "Let the Circle Be Unbroken" in his literary class, in his English and literature class. And I remember reading that when I was a child, and how changed I felt after reading the book. And so it was so funny. He got in the car and he was holding the book, and I was like, I read that, and so we were having discussions at dinner, we were having our own little book club meetings and discussing. And so I get that. That is like, it's such a phenomenal feeling to be able to say, I read that when I was in 7th grade, and to discuss it and talk about it. And you're right. There are not many books anymore that are written by present day authors that I would do that, or have that reaction to with my child. So that's awesome. So Black and White, we're going to share your documentary. I am so proud of everything that you've done. And so I want to definitely share that so other people can experience the entire documentary and get some takeaways and some knowledge and some resources that they need. And I am so glad to have met you. And I hope to, to do some things with you going forward and just stay in touch. So I'm really proud of all that you've done.
Oh, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And I would love to hear from people after they watch it. It is an important film, and I think it's important to watch before you write your first word.
All right.
So yeah, and I think that I do want to hear what people walk away with, and I want people to feel challenged after they watch it, and so. There's more to come. I do want to continue the story because what I also realize is that I really only scratched the surface
right, okay.
of a very, very big animal. And so I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out and giving some light to this, because it is a great documentary, even if I did make it myself.
Well, I've heard from others that it's a great documentary too. So I'm really proud of it, and I'm glad that you've done it, and I look forward to the next piece of it. And so I'll put all of your contact and social information in the email with the link as well, so people can talk to you directly about it. But I thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much.
All right, it is